for it. Thank you so much for having me. For those of you who bought either the first book or the second book, thank you very much. I think of you when I'm on my private jet. I don't really write a book to make money. It's always been very interesting to sit down and kind of write a second edition. It's a little bit uncomfortable actually, because if you've ever had that experience of there's like a spot on the wall and you think, oh, I better retouch that. And then you sort of paint over it and think, oh, that doesn't blend in now. So now I'm gonna have to kind of paint a bit more around it. And eventually I will have to paint the whole wall. And then it's like, oh, whilst I'm here, I might as well paint the whole room. It's a bit like that. Knowing where to stop was a very difficult thing. It's also fascinating as three authors to reread all the material. Sometimes I'm like, oh, we said this really succinctly that back then. Now, how's that all sort of got messed up over the years, the way I tell this? But it's also very difficult sometimes to tell, as a quote I'm going to use in a second, um, where I quote the book because I don't think I wrote it, but Ben and Lavrens think I wrote it, and I think one of them wrote it. And it's very funny. We just sort of kind of lose track of who wrote what. And originally I didn't really, well, I wasn't that keen to write a second edition because I was sort of doing all the leadership stuff now, and I've actually got a half-written leadership book, a design leadership book that I'm working on. And then Lou said, "Well, look, it's always been Lou Rosenfeld. It's always been a consistent seller. Would you be interested in doing a second edition?" As we sat down, Ben Lavrens and I, and had a chat about it, and we always have very interesting conversations. And so we looked at, we reflected upon what's happened over the last 12 years. And it's actually been a bit longer because we took quite a long time to write the first book because three authors take twice as long. It's not three times as fast. And so I think we started back in, I think 2011, I think it says on the contract. So it's been a while. It's been, I think, 14 years. And so looking back, we go, well, what's changed and what's our scorecard really? And so what I thought I'd do here is just sort of talk through, I'll talk about some of the new chapters and new material in it, but I'll do it as I sort of go and sort of reflecting on service design at the same time. And one of the things we did was just look down and go, well, what have we got? What did we get right? And what did we get wrong? Because some of it's a little bit predictive. Back then, service design had been around for a while. I wanted to write the book because I teach service design at the Hochschule Luzern in Switzerland. I co-lead a master's there. Now my colleague is actually one of my ex-students, Daniel is a Catalanotto. And there was a lot of, well, we think service design could do this, and Live Work had some case studies of stuff they'd worked on. But what we've really seen now is, the fundamentals are really solid. We've got all these years of practice behind us. Some of it, we've got lots of evidence for impact. I was last year speaking in Helsinki at the Service Design Network Global Conference. And I remember standing there on stage in front of 750 people, and there was another 500 or so online, and thinking, wow, this has really arrived as a discipline. There's all these people, and there were loads of great presentations of fantastic work that people have done. We have seen in government, in particular, public services, there's been a really strong, it's had a really great impact. We're seeing job ads. I think Ben mentioned this. I think there was one for the Bank of England or something like that the other day for a service designer. And kind of amazing. And for those of you who aren't as old as me, um, years ago, I mean, not even that many years ago, 15 years ago, I'd go into an insurance company and talk about service design and talk about doing journey mapping or doing some research or doing a service blueprint or any of these things. And they would look at me like I was an alien. And really, now a lot of those methods are mainstream, and it's been part of the design thinking wave that went with it as we went. So the methodology is kind of well stocked and mainstream now. And one of the nice things about the writing the book is with all those new case studies was we were able to update most of the case studies. There's a couple that one we revisited, the Jens Sidiger one, which I'll talk about later. But but there were lots and lots of people got to talk to, and they talked about. So there's a Norwegian Police Academy piece in there for the public service people here. There is some stuff from Monzo. There's a whole load of case studies. So Monzo in the UK is a sort of mobile bank, and I spoke to Vuko Aro, who's the head of design there. Um, Lots and lots of different new case studies in there. Got some new thinking in there and new sidebars. There's a great piece from Indy Young in there now. So that was really, really nice to be able to update all of those. And then we kind of thought about the sort of what is missing. So although a lot of those methods, and in fact, Laveran said, well, I think we should make the book much shorter. I don't think we should just keep adding stuff. I think we should aim to take as much stuff out as we can and make it into a pamphlet. And of course, we ended up not doing that. We ended up, we did add it. There's 81 new pages in there. Um, and we rewrote, every chapter got rewritten in some way. Some chapters got a little bit more of a sort of tweak than others. Others got significantly rewritten. We took out some methodology stuff, actually, some method stuff that was very sort of mainstream design thinking, or stuff where we felt like, we talk about it a bit, but then we point to other people's books, particularly the research part, because people like Indy Young, Sam Ladner, Steve Portigal, Erica Hall, those people have got written such good stuff about that. We didn't really need to go in as much depth. So we kept in, though, the methods and updated the methods that were particularly around service design. So the bit about blueprinting has been updated. There's a whole, the measurement chapter has been completely rewritten and updated. Ben did a lot of work on that. There's a section, a new chapter on organizational change, which Ben wrote a lot of, I wrote some of. And then I went through all the method stuff. Lavrans went and had a look at things like the Jens Idegger case study and the introduction and all those kinds of things. So everything has been rewritten, and in particular the last chapter, which was where are we, what are the future challenges? And I'll come to that in a minute. So there's all of that in there, and yet, so one of the things that has happened over those years is the industrial thinking came back with a vengeance. Um, and with it, I'm going to talk about that in a second about product, but with it, the fundamental sort of service design mindset somewhat got diluted, and that was an interesting thing for us, that people latched onto the methods and some of the mindset stuff got left behind around like an ecosystem thinking, the front stage, backstage stuff, going beyond digital touch points, and some of the organizational change stuff kind of felt like they had been a bit left behind. And it's really common for that to happen because methods are very sort of tangible, and the mindset stuff involves a change of culture and a change of ways of working. And so that's one of the things we wanted to explore. And so, despite all of that, despite sort of what design had gone through this, had its golden age, right, in the last couple of decades or 15 years, and despite all the layoffs and everything else, I still feel that the design project was a success. In that, like I said, you can now go into a large company, and there are designers in those large companies. And for those of you who haven't been involved in the industry for the last, I don't know, 15 years, and it's 30 for me. 15 years ago, in-house design departments, service design departments just really didn't exist so often. I mean, occasionally, but they're not nearly in the way they do now. That it was mostly outsourced to agencies. And so that agency landscape has massively changed because of all these acquisitions by the big management consultants. But really, there was far, far less in-house work going on. So I consider the design project a success. The only thing is that sort of mediocrity turned out to be just fine for most people. There was a piece of writing that Robert Fabricant wrote, and it was this thing here where it says the big design freak out, a generation of design leaders grapple with their future. And it was a very clickbaity headline, but it was also quite sort of self-flagellating, of around our design didn't know what did we do wrong and how do we, and it was kind of like someone had had a breakup with their girlfriend and then was blaming themselves for it all. And I don't really see it like that. And one of the things I realized is at Accenture, when I was working there as part of Fjord, was that the work we did was often compromised in some way due to timelines and budgets and all the rest of it, all the usual stuff that I'm sure all of you have experienced. And and yet the stuff we produced, even when it was slightly compromised, was way better than the clients had already had and way better than Accenture had offered it previously. And I kind of think we used to beat ourselves up, get frustrated about it, beat ourselves up about it. And actually, then I realized, well, yeah, quite often I just need an H&M t-shirt or an American Apparel or whatever the equivalent is for you guys. Um, I don't need a bespoke thing that is going to cost me a fortune. And I think designers often feel like every person has to have a bespoke Savile Row suit. And in fact, often we just need something that's better than we had. And that's kind of okay. And that we all do it. We just don't like it when people do it to our work. But then at the same time, this kind of industrial mindset crept in, and it's led to and plus the sort of algorithmic thing, which has led to what Alex Murrell talked about in this essay called The Age of Average, which is everything starts to look the same. Right, so a lot of what I saw with going on with design, and this is slightly separate from the book itself, but it's just a bit of a rant, really. But it meant that, everything starts to, when everything gets very productized, it all starts to look the same. So these are also different makes of cars and models of cars, but they kind of all look the same. It's the wind tunnel effect, right? If you design a car by putting it in a wind tunnel, you sort of all end up in the same place. But you also see it algorithmically and also in sort of just cultural styles. So there is the international Airbnb style, which looks like this. Um, but you also see it in design of it with like he used car logos here, where everything became flat because flat was the thing, and now it's all liquid glass, and which I kind of actually hate. But now it's all flat, and but these things sort of become devoid of personality because you get this convergence to this mediocre middle. None of these are bad necessarily. I don't actually like the VW one very much, but they're not sort of rubbish, right? They're just fine. And you get this going on with culture and with algorithms. This is Instagram face, which I really like. It's basically everyone who's looking like Ariana Grande or Kim Kardashian. And so what you saw with this is a similar thing going on, I think, with the rise of product. So product and product-led companies have been, it's been incredibly powerful and useful in some ways. It's given people structures and frameworks, companies to get into lean and agile when it's been done well. But the language of product is also problematic, and this is what we meant by that methodology thing, where some of the methods have been taken over, but the actual fundamental mindset of service design has not. And you saw this resurgence of silos, and this is the thing at the beginning of the book we talked about that is still the case. When we talk about feature factories and delivering product and delivery teams and stuff, and no one and shipping product and shipping features, they don't get shipped. They just get you upload some code, but they get deployed, right? But that just means uploading some code to someone else's computer somewhere. That's what the cloud is. It sounds far less exciting if you say we FTP'd a new file up than it does we deployed a new feature. But it's really what you're doing. And I know you're not FTPing anymore, but it doesn't really make any difference. And so with that language, you get that design got pushed back down, and particularly product design got pushed back down into the assembly line. And a lot of different disciplines got merged into one under the umbrella of product design, which is, I think, problematic. On the assembly line, the person putting on the wheels down the other end doesn't need to know about the person putting on the windscreen wipers, right? Just that they're discrete tasks. And so you get these silos happening all over again. And I think it meant that for organizations, they were able to, I think one of the reasons it's been so successful is because it spoke this industrial language of organizations which were managed in this industrial way, which is the workers, they can be unskilled labor, that we just tell them to do this one thing over and over again. And the white collar workers, managers in the glass box overlooking the factory are the brains of things. And we're the ones who have the strategy and know how it all goes together. And it's very classist. It stems from the Industrial Revolution in England in the late 19th century, where classism was very rife in the Victorian era. Um, and it still permeates management structures today, and it still permeates the way we think about things. Right? So these things are not products. Recently, when I was giving a webinar, actually with Birgit Marga, um, there was an outage. There was some kind of Zoom outage, so I couldn't actually log into Zoom. There was a recent AWS one, as people know, there was a Microsoft Azure one the other day. I couldn't log into Mural as a result. But the internet's very brittle actually because it's quite siloed too. But when these things are their servers aren't working, you just get placeholder squares, and this is how you know they're not products, right? They are services. They've got a whole ecosystem. And the problem is when you create a service, this is the quote, that when services are created in silos, they're experienced in bits. And this is a problem. That's what the part of the mindset we wanted to get back was this shift from um, that industrial thing to this ecosystem mindset. And I much prefer gardens as a metaphor for this. Some people have heard me say this before, but I really like the idea of gardens because nobody says we've shipped the garden, right? It's never finished. And you're always then looking at the relationship between things. If you plant a tree and it does really well, and it's like, great, that tree is really thriving, but now it's casting shade over this other stuff, and that stuff's not doing well, and it's dying off. You have to make just some decisions about do we cut the tree back, do we move those other plants, and you get that kind of neighbor planting thing that you do to protect them from bugs and things. The growth hacker in the growth department in the garden metaphor would just be planting bamboo everywhere. And if you've ever planted bamboo in your garden, you'll know that's not a good idea. It just gets massively out of control. But hey, it grew. So with that, we then started to think about, well, what the missing chapter was organizational change, right? Because you can talk to people about working in different ways, and you can deliver a service design blueprint and concepts and everything. But ultimately, what we realized was the organizations are often not able to receive that work. Right? They're just you're asking people to work in ways that they're not yet set up for. And Ben actually said this the other day, and it's a really nice phrasing of it, that I've always felt that service design is organizational change, really. And he said, it's kind of an organizational change methodology that actually understanding people and understanding what it means to change the way people are working or to ask people to change the way they're working in order to shift into, the whole organization into more of a service design mindset or a service mindset. That's quite tough, and the understanding that the people aspect of that is really important. That managers and stakeholders are people too. There was a section I wrote about this. Understanding what their fears and anxieties are is really important, and understanding what you can do to help them move from one state to the next. And if anyone has moved countries or has moved jobs or been in a relationship and for a long-term relationship and split, things like that, most people like the idea of change and the idea of the sort of the end state. Most people like the end state when they've got there. Almost no one likes the activity of changing. It's really unpleasant. I've done it lots of times, that stuff, and it's horrible. And it takes a while to settle down. And so if you're going to get any change in the organization going, you really have to understand it and understanding what's going on. So the chapter on that really kind of talks about that in more detail. But most of it is around recognizing that's a thing. And if you don't recognize that's a thing, you'll end up designing service design concepts and not actually services, or not delivering services or implementing services because the organization just blocks it. Now, and it's not just one thing. It's not like the organization is an evil empire that's stopping it. It's just the fact that it's like a systems effect of lots of people resisting. So I mentioned before, we now have all these case studies. We've got a much better way of measuring stuff as well, and looking across all those multiple different metrics and different touch points to measure them. And in the measurement chapter, there's a whole load of new ways of thinking about that. And we also kind of felt, though, that we wrote a piece, well, I wrote a piece, we put it under our names for Touchpoint, uh, a few issues ago around this idea of service design to be can and should be a countercultural voice. So rather than think about, oh, how can we sort of productize service design, which doesn't make any sense, it's more like, no, there is actually a role for service design in the organization to be surfacing and visualizing the way it's become siloed, the cracks in things, and that, and taking that systems view of things and saying, well, if we do this, then it's going to have this effect on these other things, and that's quite important. So we then looked at the future challenges and revisited those because there's nothing like making yourself feel stupid by going predicting some stuff and then looking back on those predictions in in 10 years later, 12 years later, and realizing how wrong you were. But some of the stuff we're right about. So Jensidiger, which is the opening case study in the book, Lavrans went and had a very nice dinner with the man who's and the guys who were the then CEO and the main sponsor of this thing back in 2010 called Extreme Customer Orientation. Um, and the CEO is now retired, but the it was really interesting to go, but you don't often get to do this and to go back and go, oh, we talked about all this stuff back then and did all this work, how did it go? And Gjensidige, the background to it was, they are, I think, Norway or the Nordics' largest insurer. And there comes a point where you can't really expand that much in terms of just numbers when everyone's insured. But they recognized that there was a opportunity in offering insurance in a much more human and customer-centered way back in 2010. And so this went from a sort of corporate program to, initiative to an everyday practice within Gjensidige. And that was the goal of the work was really to get them to think, the organizational change bit too. And so now in 2024, by 2024, the total returns for the owners was 700%. And it's important to note that that's not just kind of rich Jeff Bezos style thing. The customers own half of the company and they receive some annual dividends for that. So it's a really nice story. And they've consistently ranked at the top of national customer satisfaction indexes. So that economic impact, we took a kind of triple bottom line approach to the future challenges of economy, sustainability or environment, and social impact. One of the things we talked about, though, was their sharing economy. And we had this whole thing back then. There was a famous book by Rachel Botsman called What's Mine is Yours. And it was all about the rise of the sharing economy. And we had this whole hope that we would all be sharing stuff and having access to things and services rather than owning things ourselves and this hyper consumption of objects and products. And that's turned into a bit of a monster, unfortunately. This is Helsinki, actually. I walked past all these scooters. The average lifespan of a share scooter is 3 months. That's pretty grim. Um, I don't know how much they get refurbished or the batteries get kind of, salvaged and stuff. I mean, lots of these end up in canals and lakes, but it's pretty grim. And obviously they just get treated. That was the problem with the service sharing economy is everyone wants to borrow someone else's stuff. Nobody wants to lend it. And because when you borrow stuff, you don't really care for it. But it's not just that, it's also the connection of the sort of Silicon Valley model of venture capital fueled startup and scale. When you connect it into that, that happens in digital, and when you connect that to physical things, it's really problematic. So these are not, tulip fields in the Netherlands. What this is these are discarded shared bikes, the physical consequences of digital disruption. And this is in China, which is massively problematic, right? As we know, unfortunately, but we still do it. With that, with this sort of industrial thinking, is we don't really take the raw materials. Don't there are costs somewhere, but they're not really the environmental cost is not a problem we think about. That's outside of our scope, and what happens to that stuff at the other end is also outside of our scope. Right? So in the sort of launch and scale and dump these in cities, we ignore the kind of local laws, we ignore the local kind of customs of the place, and we just sort of try to sort of dominate. And there are consequences to this, as we know. So that's been a real shame. You also see in things like Airbnb, and it's not just Airbnb, but they're a primary one, um, really wreck cities like Barcelona and stuff. And now there's this pushback. So Barcelona's just passed some laws around this. Paris has banned share scooters in and bikes in apart from their own ones in Paris. You can still ride your own scooter around, but it's not no longer littered with scooters like this. So this has become a massive problem, which kind of links us to the other one, which is the ecological ambitions. Because this is obviously an ecological one, but there's things like the Airbnb stuff and some other aspects of like obviously social media and everyone becoming a content creator and all the rest of it. That stuff is what really became a monster, and that was a real shame to see because we it could have been something else. Um, what we've also seen, obviously, is the ecological ambitions. There we had a whole load of aspect of that. And I still think service design has a really strong role to play um, in circular economy, in that because of there's that fundamental systems thinking to it that is part of service design, and obviously an important part of the circular economy or cradle to cradle, whatever those different systems are of shifting people's behavior from, again, the dream of the sharing economy, but shifting people's behavior from that kind of product consumption, or at least to thinking much more of a kind of life cycle, and how you might shift behavior, how you might get people to think about that. And part of it is still making those services much, much easier to access and use. It's still a bit of a pain in the ass to do your kind of recycling separation. And there's still this thing of, oh, this is where does this go? What does this one go in? There's still this thing where we kind of have electronic devices that have got that little wheelie bin with a line through it, um, which is, don't throw this in the bin because it's consumer electronic waste. Um, and it is a real problem because what do you do with it? And what you do with it is you, as the guy who wrote, I've forgotten his name now, the guy who wrote End and Engineering, um, said, you do what everyone, you're not meant to throw it in the bin, so you just eventually open your drawer and put your old phone in the drawer, and now you've got a drawer full of old phones, but you don't know what to do with it. Joe McLeod is who I'm thinking of. Um, and that's a problem, but there are then actually building those services, and what Joe McLeod talks about, I can really recommend his book actually, or his books, is the offboarding really needs to be massively improved so that it makes it actually a celebratory and pleasant experience to bring your laptop back to Apple or whatever it is, or pay off your mortgage, um, instead of just only focusing on the front end of that experience. And we are still not living in a world of fantastic, wonderful services. A lot of things like all those public services, all the gov.uk stuff, all of those things have been massively improved. I recently renewed my passport for the UK, and it was super, super easy. I'm really happy that people have been working on that kind of stuff. As you saw, though, at the other end with Doge in the States, all that work that they had been doing, they just got vandalized and dismantled by Elon Musk's kind of wrecking crew. And you saw how brittle it can be when you digitize everything, right? Those digital transformations put everything in one place, and if you just get access to that, then you can shut everything else down. So there are problems with that too. But there is still plenty of work to be done. I have faith, that there are service designers. I see service designers in all sorts of places. They may not, companies may not ask for service designers, but there's definitely service design work to be done. So please go and do it. I want to see much better services. It's the antidote to sort of enshittification, I would say. Thank you very much for hearing me, listening to me talking about this. I got a code for the Service Design Network, which I want to pass on to you. So if anyone wants to get the book before the end of the year, so it's got through to the end of this December, you can get 20% off. If you want to find me, you can find me. Well, just go to Polaine.com and you'll find everything, or screenshot the QR code and you'll find me there. That is it for me. If anyone has got any questions, I'm happy to